Magento Creative, partnering with the client to help fulfill their strategic growth, serving the world as an Adobe Gold partner and BigCommerce Elite partner. Magento, the code of commerce. All right, welcome to Talk Commerce. Talk Commerce. Sorry about that. I have Mark Lewis with me today. Excuse me. I have Mark Lewis today. He's got a super fancy camera, which I'm very jealous of. I left mine at home. Mark, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hey, I'm Mark Lewis. I'm the founder and CTO of Netalico Commerce. We're a e-commerce agency specializing in Magento, Shopify, and BigCommerce.
Great, perfect, thank you. So the name Netalico, right? Is it?
Yeah.
Is it anywhere derived from Metallica?
Well, funny story. When I first created the name, and you Googled Netalico, Google would say, "Do you mean Metallica?" It isn't derived from that, but I am a pretty big Metallica fan, and I just wanted kind of a technical sounding word that didn't have a domain name that was already registered. So I just created a word.
I'm a big fan of just creating words. I'm also a domain name junkie. If anybody mentions anything, even in a meeting, I'm often Googling and then going to Namecheap and then registering the name, which is a complete waste of money. I think I have 400 or 500 domain names now. Half of them I let expire probably, and half of them I renew, which is, again, a complete waste of money. So I do have
It's funny to... I was going to say, it's funny to see like a year later when they first renew, you're like, oh, that's the idea I had like 12 months from now.
Right. I wish I could get Brent.com. That's a hard one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I registered rk.pizza so I could have m@rk.pizza. So it like looks like mark.pizza.
That's a good
one.
one.
Best.
Yeah. Yeah, I got to get clever. I got wgn.to. I thought that was a good one.
Ooh, that is, yeah. I registered Natali.co. So it's like, it spells Netalico.
The other one that I have that I think is good is agen.to.
Ooh.
So
yeah, getting shorter and shorter.
m.agen.to. They can't come after me for trademarking then. Well, they can now that they know what I've intended it for. I also owned Wadobe and Wagento. No, Adogento or some stupid thing like that. Anyways, we're not here to talk about domain names today, though. We are here to talk about Shopify and Magento. The one thing I'm interested in, well, tell us a little bit about your Shopify practice, and I know you have a Magento practice too.
Yeah, I mean, so my background, like we kind of go way back, is Magento. That's the first e-commerce platform I started working with like 8 or 9 years ago. So we really like grew up on Magento. But then around the Magento 1 to Magento 2 transition, we started realizing that for some of our clients, Magento 2 wasn't necessarily like the logical migration path. And actually, at first, I was pretty resistant, and we lost a couple of clients because they were like, we're going to move to Shopify with or without you. So that's the point where I was like, okay, maybe the Shopify thing isn't so bad. I still kind of hated it because as a developer, I was like, I need full control. I want to be able to do everything the client asks. But after we started migrating a couple clients, we realized for a good majority of them, they could do what they wanted on Shopify, even without full control over all the code, and that like the the software as a service kind of lock in, which I was seeing as like a disadvantage, was kind of a good thing for some of them, because then they didn't get into too much trouble about like asking to customize like the checkout, for example, which it's great to be able to customize the checkout, but when it breaks, it's not so great. So in some regards, it's nice to have those guardrails around them, especially if they're a smaller client.
Yeah, and I had this exact conversation. What I said was, Shopify is like your front yard, and you're not allowed to leave, or you have a fence around it. So you have your front yard, you're not allowed to leave. Magento is like the world. You can go anywhere you want in the world. And in fact, Magento allows you to go to the moon, but sometimes you end up in, say, like North Korea or something like that, and then things get ugly quick. So, you've got your Magento install, you've modified your Magento install, so you're in North Korea. Now suddenly you've taken some poster down off the wall and you're in jail. That was a really bad metaphor. Maybe I should edit that out. But you can see the problem that you have. You can do whatever you want, and then that problem persists. I mean, no, it's not a problem. That solution
Hmm.
persists into the future with cost.
Right.
So I know that one thing we do, we see customers that have 70 or 80 Magento modules in there, and they want to maintain that, but they resist on their patch updates, and then at some point they resist so much that they're a whole version behind, 2.2 or something instead of 2.3, and
Yep.
and it gets even more expensive to continue to maintain that.
Yeah, it's a
Um,
lot of code debt, and that's not exclusive to Magento. There can be code debt and Shopify and BigCommerce, but because you have less control, I think you have less ability to dig yourself into like a deeper and deeper hole.
exactly, and you have those guardrails. I think are important to remember, or actually, the metaphor I used this morning uh, was also around, if you tell the client they can, and we were talking specifically around Universal Music, so we had all these stores and all these artists, and they're like, if you tell them they can, they'll do whatever they think they can do, and they don't, like, at some point somebody on the team doesn't care how much it costs, they just want it because they can do it. With Shopify, you can't do everything, and inherently it does make it a little less expensive.
Yeah, and to the cost point as well, I think that Shopify has some significant cost savings, but for the kind of clients that want to go to the moon, if they can pay for it, like I think it's what they need, especially a lot of like B2B clients and clients that have like really complex integrations. Basically, it's worth it for them to invest that money in something like Magento. But for smaller and just simpler clients, like all these D2C companies popping up, they don't need that complexity. And it's just having that complexity around leads to just inevitably like more costs.
Yeah, cost and performance. I mean, I think, again, going
Hmm.
back to the people that think that every single extension is going to be their saving grace. After some point, that the hundredth extension in the library is a straw that will just kill your site from a speed standpoint. So again,
Yeah,
the guardrails on Shopify help us with that.
totally. And again, Shopify does have some of those issues as well, with installing way too many apps. But at least they're limited to more on the front end of the site. And we do a lot of performance optimization on Shopify sites, but it's more around like Google's core vitals and page load speed. And in terms of like the back end performance, generally we don't have to worry about that unless we're inheriting a site from like another developer. There can be some issues with like their liquid language, where if you do like for loops inside of for loops, which there's some instructions online that actually tell you to do that, and most Shopify developers actually have no concept of like the performance of Liquid on the back end. Liquid's Shopify's theme engine. Um, that can cause issues, and a lot of people don't know about it because like once you go to the page once, it kind of is in cache for a couple minutes. But if you got a lot of things going on in the back end and that cache isn't there, it can be pretty slow. And we've seen that a lot with like shops collection pages, where they list a lot of the products. The most common thing is they list 50 products, and then they also loop through all the like sizes and colors of the 50 products. And once you have like maybe 30 variants per product and 50 products, that's hundreds of things that it's looped through. So just not to digress, but I'm trying to be the other side as well. It's like Shopify is not perfect.
Sure, that's really interesting, and I guess I hadn't realized that. So if you are if you're a developer and you're just, let's say you're a novice developer on Shopify and you do something like that where you do a bunch of loops on a category page, it looks good, and it looks good with the test users that you're trying, and then you launch the site and suddenly you get 30,000 users. What happens? Does the site crash? I'm just curious on.
With Shop,
Go ahead.
yeah, at least with Shopify, the site doesn't really crash. Like they're good in terms of stability, and even if you like generate a huge load, the thing is like you'll just get like every 10th user they'll get a slow page load. So there is the concept of full page caching in Shopify, but no one really knows about it because you don't have any control over it. So like it'll be fast for 10 users, and then something like a product will change in the back end, even just one inventory decrease, and then it clears out the entire site's full page cache. And so that for that 10th user, the page will take 16 seconds to load instead of like 500 milliseconds.
Okay, so here's a scenario that happened in real life. The client wanted to have their category page, and they wanted to have inventory showing on their category page. And they created a category page that had every single item in their catalog, which loaded, I don't know, 1,000. And then they wanted to have it so they could, I don't remember, it was something like they wanted to show at least 100 products on their page.
Oh gosh.
So in that case, I mean, not only did it just crawl to a standstill, but their ERP complained because they're making so many calls all at once, and then
Right.
they had a problem. There was a problem understanding that 100 calls to the ERP all at once doesn't just mean 100 calls on the page load. It means 100 calls every time somebody actually looks at it. Because you have to, unless you cache it, but then it's not real time. So
Exactly.
I guess it's what you're saying. It's theoretically possible to do that same thing in Shopify.
Exactly. And it's not as transparent because you don't see like the back end. Like at least with Magento, we can kind of debug, we see this little thing is causing this performance issue. If you're like a novice developer in Shopify and you're doing, honestly, I would say bad code practices in the theme, you can really still get yourself into that performance hole.
Interesting. So from a merchant standpoint, do you delineate a customer that would be good for Shopify or a one that would be a good candidate for Magento?
Yeah. Now we really look like look at like Shopify as kind of the default. So we first look at, hey, is Shopify a good fit for you? And those kind of customers are usually um, more D2C companies where they don't have like a huge inventory. They don't have really complex requirements around like filtering. Um, it's more like they need a marketing site where you have a homepage, you have a collections page with a handful of products, and you have the product page, and then you just check out. Um, but if you get outside of that, where they're saying like, oh, I need like a really complex like content management system because we have a lot of blogs, a lot of pages, then we start looking at either BigCommerce or Magento, because once you start really like trying to build on top of Shopify, it it's hard. It's possible, and I've seen a lot of really complex Shopify Plus builds, and we do a lot of Shopify Plus, but it's still kind of the same core platform. At that point, I feel like it's a bit more of like the bolt on method, where it's like, all right, we have Shopify, but we're also trying to plug in this other system, and it just gets a little crazy. At least with Magento, when you get into those situations, you can have them kind of more seamlessly integrated, like directly with each other, instead of trying to like use a bunch of APIs and just kind of like hotwire everything together.
Okay. How do you differentiate then when you choose BigCommerce or Shopify?
That's a good question. Um, we still look at Shopify as kind of the default over BigCommerce, but BigCommerce we look at as a pretty good option if they have a lot more products and more complexity around pricing. Shopify doesn't really do like discounts and tiered pricing very well. There's some apps that you can kind of do it, but it's really janky. And so if they have a bit more like tiered pricing, or more in like the wholesale space, in like B2B, BigCommerce starts to look a little more appealing, because you get into those like guardrails in Shopify, and they're no longer guardrails, they're just limitations that you're like, well, I need to do this and I just can't.
Ha- I did a search the other day on headless. I
Yeah.
was looking at what are other people talking about for headless on Magento specifically, and
Mm.
Shopify is paying for an ad that says headless Shopify. I haven't seen anybody do it yet, but I've heard that now they're supporting headless. Have you seen any installs yet on the headless versions of Shopify?
Yeah, I know of a couple headless stores on Shopify. It's the whole headless thing is a little weird, because I I don't think Shopify necessarily wants people to go headless, because once they go outside of like their theme engine, then like apps and the ecosystem doesn't really work well for them. Um, but I think they've had enough like enterprise clients say like, oh no, this is what we want to do. Um, it's I My experience with their headless API is like GraphQL has been a bit mixed. Um, like we're doing a couple like kind of headless hybrid projects where we're using the theme engine for most of it, but then we're using the GraphQL API for more complex things like the collections page. Um, it, like that's a great example of some of our clients like want to have like 50 products and the variants, like the colors of the socks and that kind of thing, and to get that page to load like with good performance, we need to use some sort of API to get all that information. Um, so I don't know. What are your thoughts on headless? I have a lot of other thoughts on as well.
Yeah, I think the buzz, there's a bunch of buzzes going around, and headless is just another buzzword. And PWA
Yeah.
Studio is a buzzword.
Yeah.
Magento. I do feel like a lot of platforms are looking at that. I, and I've been also we've been talking a lot about the Haifa theme for Magento as a
Hmm.
monolith type theme. I think that looking at like commerce tools, what they're doing in Europe, and what Big Commerce now is offering headless, and giving people giving people choices to incorporate different front ends, I think is a great thing. Um,
Yeah.
so is it gonna be default, or will Magento just start not giving away or not giving a front end when you get Magento? I
Hmm.
I don't think so. I think it's going to come with some kind of default theme because they do want to attract users that can just turn it on and go and not have to spin up a jar or whatever to run your other non your serverless instance of PWA or whatever. I do think that we are going to have that option, and I think the ability to have multiple sources for your content and even multiple front ends is a great ability to have. Um,
Yeah.
it gives us a lot more flexibility. However, it does offer a lot more complexity in what we're trying to do as a merchant, and it does um, it does make it more difficult as an entry point for a lot of merchants if you're going to choose Magento, and if it doesn't have a front end at all. They mean then nobody who is that small D2C, they would never choose Magento.
Yeah, I think the same on Shopify. If you go headless on Shopify, it's not like a simple build anymore, and in some ways, it immediately kind of puts you into a code debt in terms of at least the apps and the integrations. We've like worked with a couple headless sites that someone else originally did, and the merchants are like, "Oh, when I install this app, why doesn't it work?" Well, it's like, well, the app is supposed to install something in the theme, but since you have a totally custom front end, it doesn't work. You either have to implement it totally custom, or it, you just can't do it. So I think that you lose a lot of the value in a simple platform like Shopify if you go ahead and go headless. And at that point too, I kind of wonder, it's like, well, why did you even choose Shopify in the first place if you're like not going to use half the platform?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And my hope is that Magento continues to maintain Magento open source as
Yeah.
somewhat of a monolith, or at least a installable version of an e-commerce platform that can be up and running in however long it takes you to install it. I know that I've done many talks with Derek Harlick where we do Magento in an hour, Magento in 90 minutes, and it's perfectly possible. You can do everything you want. And I
Yeah.
think the one thing Shopify has done really, really well is paint the picture that Magento is super complicated. Um, and I don't completely buy it. I think people buy into the fact that maybe the maybe the back end is better in Shopify. I don't completely agree with that. I think that once you're in a e-commerce backend, it's an e-commerce backend, and you find your way around. And once you know your way around, it's really simple, right?
Yeah.
And I think like Derek Harlick and I did the Magento in 90 minutes, and Magento in 60 minutes, and Magento in 40 minutes, however long you need to do it, that it's perfectly possible to come up with a store that's just like a Shopify store. The thing you don't get is the ability to easily install a theme from a front end GUI and have it running. I think that's the downside you get.
Yeah, themes and extensions or apps. It's with the Magento Connect store, or not Magento Connect. What is it? Is the Magento extension place.
The
Have they renamed it,
marketplace.
by the way?
What's that?
Marketplace, yeah. Is it the Adobe Marketplace soon? Like
It will
Adobe
be. Yeah,
Magento Marketplace?
it's going to be the
Yeah,
Adobe. Yeah, the Adobe Commerce Marketplace, most likely.
gotcha. Um, you can't you can't really easily install something from there without being at least semi-technical. So I think once you get kind of outside of the core Magento, that's when like the complexity starts getting to you. But the actual like Magento out of the box does have a lot of functionality, a lot of functionality that Shopify doesn't have out of the box, or even with a few extensions. So if you're okay with like using the core Magento as is, it could be pretty good. I think when you get into trouble is like the apps, and if you want to style it at all, it's like I think I think that's been a big issue since the Magento 2 is just getting you could install one of those like off the shelf themes and it can be pretty good. But as soon as you do that, still like you get into the troubles of like, oh, it has a bug with like this version of Magento, and then you have to update it, and then you get on the Magento rabbit trail.
Yeah, and my experience with those off-the-shelf themes are A, they include everything that you don't need and just add a bunch of
Yeah,
heaviness to your whole store and slow you down. And then um, they oftentimes take more time to modify than it would be just to use the blank theme or even Luma.
right.
Like there's so many things that the client really wants in the end. They see the theme, but then they don't want it to look like the theme. So we start changing it around, and pretty soon it's not the theme anymore. And you've spent 400 hours modifying the theme that they really wanted to get for $80.
Yeah, yeah. Like I prefer to do Magento 2 builds now where they want a totally custom design. So we'll do the UX, and then we'll do the development totally custom. We tried to over the years do those kind of cheaper Magento 2 builds where it's like, okay, we're gonna use off the shelf parts, off the shelf themes, and just tweak it a little. But like you said, it just ends up being even more work and slower. So it's like, what's the point at that point?
Yeah, exactly. Um, so it all right. So one thing, one small thing. Do you remember Magento Connect, and you could install things in the back end, and users
Yeah,
could go into Magento 1 and click install this, and then it would completely crash, and then they're like stuck.
yeah. It would be like do at your own risk, and everyone would be like, well, sure. And then you get like requests from the client, and it's like, oh, it broke my site, and you're like, why didn't you do this on the dev site? And if it's an
Yeah,
existing client, you can ask that. If it's a new client, they're like, what's a dev site? And you're like, why don't you have a dev site?
yeah. Well, I'll give you my FTP.
Yeah, exactly.
uh,
At least with Shopify, was we have like the concept of themes, and like themes kind of tend to be almost like work as dev sites for the clients. But sometimes the same thing will happen. I'll be like, why did you install it on the production theme? Like, never modify the production theme.
Is there, that's a good question. Is there a way to go? Is there like a source control in Shopify? So if somebody does, somebody on your marketing team goes and updates a section of the site and they're like, oh, wow, this is the worst thing I've ever seen. Can we just revert? Is there a way to revert that back?
So by default, they do have a way to look at the themes, and per file, you can like revert for file. But sometimes there's a lot of modifications across files, so that can be a pain. Um, for us, like in terms of development, we actually version control the whole thing, and we have scripts set up to watch for changes to the production theme. If the client either edits it's themselves, or an apps a lot of times like install things in the theme or like change things. We can actually see that kind of in real time of like, oh, this file, had this little modification, and it commits a git, so you can see like the line that it committed.
Okay.
I would love for that to be more like baked into Shopify, because that's something that we've had to do, like create internally. It's felt better because it's more like Magento, where we can see like exactly what's changing.
Yeah, I wish every e-commerce site would have, well, I wish they had version control on the data updates that clients do. Are you
Oh yeah.
familiar with MDoc and Aaron Moss and that whole project he's working on where you can spin up instances really quick? MDOQ.
Uh, no, I don't think I am.
Yeah, I did an interview with him if you want to look back at one of at the podcast. But he has that sort of functionality that he captures the data part as well, so you can do a version control
Wow.
on your config, your admin config. So, the idea is that any developer can launch an admin or Magento store in some point in time. And so he does a version control on the data and the front end, or the whole application, so you can kind of go in different parts of it to see how things are behaving in with something changed in some way, which obviously is great to do it in dev or staging. And if you have the option to revert in production, that's good. I didn't confirm if you can just change the config file, the config settings, and not the rest of the data in the database. I think you can, but I'd have to double check on
Gotcha.
that.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I would love that for some of our Magento clients.
Yeah, MDOQ, Aaron Moss. It's a pretty cool. It's a very, very cool package. It's kind of like, I don't know. Well, Blue Gento from Thomas Fleck was one that was early on, and there's some other people out there doing some kind of Magento SaaS version. Magento Go, that was a great one. If you wanted to have some kind of a Magento SaaS. So
Magento Go.
speaking of Magento Go and Magento One, what? So I know we talked a little bit about the fact that a lot of original Magento people, Magento users, went to Shopify. Do you think in the future there's any way back for those users? Do you think the ship has sailed on Magento at some point, and that's like there is a space that doesn't make sense for Magento? I guess what I'm
Right.
curious about is if you feel Adobe might go back to that space at some point.
Um, from what I've seen, they don't have an interest in that space. I mean, I feel like they've they've said with their words like, "Oh no, we care about it," but the actions speak louder than words. Um, and I think that Adobe would have to create an entirely new product, and I don't think it's actually good for Magento to try to like SaaSify itself, or even like Magento Cloud, which I think they actually intentionally blur the lines between SaaS and PaaS, which is platform as a service, to make people think it's SaaS, but it's not. If they really want to get into that market, I think that they would need to develop a new product, or acquire a company, like a Wix or a Squarespace, like a product that's actually built from the ground up in that way. The problem, you're probably familiar with, like with Magento Cloud, is that even if it like appears to be seamless and maybe kind of SaaS, it's really just Magento hosting, and you just have the same problems on a different system.
Yeah, it is. I mean, theoretically, you get support throughout the code base from Magento, and I know they're getting much better at that support, but you're exactly right.
Yep.
You are, in fact, just pacifying Magento. That's my
Yes.
That's my one joke for today. Instead of sassifying, we're going to pacify it, which means we're kind of mellowing it out for it. For the never mind. I'll keep moving. Um, so, uh, so having said that, then, do you and so do you do you take on any Magento 1 to Magento 2 upgrades anymore? You see people still doing
Um, yeah, very rarely. I think most of the people that have like been on Magento 1 and are still on Magento 1, um, at that point they're not looking for a Magento 2. So it's just like they've been dragging their feet on migrating, and they're like, okay, like if I have to migrate, at least I'm gonna try to migrate to something simple. Um, like the problem with a lot of those clients still on Magento 1 is they've resisted upgrading to Magento 2 because they know how expensive it is. They've probably gotten quotes, for the past couple of years, and they're like, whoa, like this is gonna like bankrupt me. Like one of our clients are like, we quoted them, I think it was something like 200K, because they had a really complex Magento 1 site, and they're like, we literally would have to take a second mortgage out on our house to afford this. Um, so that's also a little, not to digress too much, but why we've supported Magento 1 for a while. And I'm still like a big part of the Open Mage project, where for those clients that have like customized Magento 1 so much, and it's not really feasible for them to move to Magento 2, it's actually like it's working for them. Like Magento 1 is like a comfortable shoe that like they've worn into the ground, but it fits their foot, and they don't really have like a good reason to like pay 200K to upgrade. It's not gonna like suddenly like revolutionize their business.
Yeah, so you do OpenMage. There's also magento-1.com. And then
Hmm.
I know there are some hosting companies that are sort of using some of those other tools in the back end to ensure that their clients are up to par. Um,
Yep.
from the OpenMage one standpoint, do you feel as though that the updates have been coming in and you've been able to keep up with, or it has been able to keep up with all the patches and things that are happening around Magento
Yeah.
version?
Yeah, Magento version 1. No, it's it's not been too bad. We started like a bug bounty program, I think about 6 months ago. It was private, and then now it's on HackerOne, just like the old Magento bug bounty program, and it's been good. I think Magento 1 at least has been so like hardened into the ground, and at least for this version of Magento, there's two versions of OpenMage. There's like Magento 1.x, and then there's like a Magento 20.x. The 1.x is what I'm focused on, because it's only like security and bug fixes. Um, so since it doesn't change much, there's not a lot of new security vulnerabilities. It's mostly looking at like things that are reported on Magento 2 that might have some crossover in the code, or some of the older libraries like Zen framework.
And to get it to be compatible with the newest version of, say, PHP, does somebody have to go through the code and just make sure everything works and then offer a update or a version of it that'll work with PHP 7.4 or whatever that is?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've definitely been trying to keep up with the PHP versions. Once we got to 7, that was the biggest leap, honestly. The 7.x releases haven't been bad. It's just usually minor syntax changes. The harder part for Magento 1 merchants with PHP is more of the extensions. So like as an agency, we
Mm.
offer Magento 1 support like as kind of a package, and we'll help them install the patches, and then support their extensions. Because also a lot of their extension developers aren't supporting their extensions anymore.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Do you know Yisa Rietsma?
Mm-mm.
Oh, he supports, he does all of his work on PHP 6.
Oh,
Anyways, it's
wow.
a joke.
That's
Never mind. That one, yeah.
wait,
Yeah,
wait.
never mind. He has the t-shirts he
I,
sells. I learned
okay. I
PHP
mean,
on PHP 6. Anyways, sorry.
I know PHP 6 doesn't exist, so I know that part of the joke.
We'll keep
I
moving.
thought about it. I thought you said it was like 5.6. I was like, oh, yeah, that sucks, but it's not funny.
6.1.
Oh,
This is the
really
technical part of
advanced.
the thing that nobody's going to care about.
Right.
Good. Well, we have a little bit of time left. Uh, why don't uh, why don't you give us a shameless plug about Netalico and Metallica and your relationship with Lars? Is it Lars?
Yeah,
And the fact
the
that now,
drummer,
because we've said this, they're going to start sending you bills for using the near name.
the trademark.
I'm ruining
Yeah.
everything today. Sorry.
I mean, the next thing probably I'm gonna say is he's gonna sue me for defamation because I really love Metallica, but like he cannot stay on time. Like if you watch live videos of them, like they're speeding up and slowing down, and it's like, come on, like just stay at the same beat. Um,
I
sorry,
think that's a
Lars.
fair criticism of a drummer. I think that happens.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of like drummers now like play with click tracks, so they're like mechanical basically. But like at some point, you at least need to stay mostly on the same tempo.
Well, I do play piano, and I do find it sometimes incredibly hard to stay right on beat. And I know piano is a percussion instrument, and I should be much better at it. But when I learned, I took piano lessons for a long time as a kid, and I realize now that all I actually did was listen to my teacher play it, and then just play. I could read the music, and then I could just play it. But I don't. I read
Yeah.
music, but I don't keep time. So it's like the worst thing you could do. So it's like if I don't hear it, then I don't really know how it goes because I have a really problem. So it makes me even worse, like playing with a singer or something like that, who needs to be on beat with the music.
You're just like playing to the beat of your own drum internally.
Exactly.
You're just
Boom,
feeling
boom.
it.
Nice one. Good one. All right.
Uh, okay. Oh, Natalico, the company I founded, also. Yeah, the shameless plug. So we're in agencies similar to you guys, but I think a couple years ago when we started the Shopify transition in terms of like doing more Shopify, we started trying to emphasize more of like the full stack e-commerce agency and not just the development, because I'm a developer and that's the part that I actually care about the most probably. But I realized a couple years ago there's a lot more to e-commerce than just the code. So that's why I expanded the company and the team to do a lot more like UX design, because if the code is perfect and the site looks like crap, like who cares? Like I think for a couple months I was literally like kind of paying our designer to redesign sites for clients that didn't care to redesign it, because I'm like, don't have anything in our portfolio that actually looks good. I don't, it doesn't. I can't just tell like potential clients, well, the code in the backend is like really good. So we do a lot of design. We recently did a project for a company called Lee. I'm wearing one of their shirts. Um, just doing the design of their subscriptions engine on Recharge, and it's kind of crazy. With good UX design, you can make such a huge impact on like how many people sign up for email newsletter, how many the conversion rate. I know that all this stuff, but like it sometimes you take for granted of like just having good code, but the visual side is a huge part, and a lot of integrations as well now, like Clavio or is it Clavio? I can never remember. Setting up really good email flows and the design of those, and then just like we've really carved out a niche for ourselves and kind of being like premium, I would say enterprise support for Shopify and Shopify Plus, because um, once you're doing a couple $1 million on a platform, regardless of whether it's Magento or Shopify, if something goes wrong or you need to change something like urgently, you don't want to have to like try to ping your freelance developer that you hired from Upwork. And we've gotten a lot of clients that they've been growing to like the 5 million on Shopify, and they just had random developers over the years. And then like one huge client that I was talking to, uh, they were huge, and they were like, yeah, we had a great freelance developer, but he just disappeared. We haven't talked to him for a month. And I'm like, wow, that's not good. um,
That's
like
a pretty
what
common
if
thing in
something
the
happens?
Magento world. Our developer just disappeared.
Yeah, yeah, and it's like for Magento or Shopify, if something breaks, I think with Shopify you can get a little more support because they, even in the lower tiers, but they're pretty busy, and the support response time is not great. And a lot of times when you do get a response, they'll kind of kick it back to you and say like, you have to talk to your developer, or this is an app problem, and then you'll kind of go on this circle. So what we've like really specialized is being like more of the front line. And honestly, I don't think our clients really use the Shopify live chat or Shopify support because it's just kind of not worth it to them. It's so slow, and most of the answers they get now are like, talk to your Shopify developer. So they're like, well, let's just skip talking to Shopify support and talk to our developer agency directly.
Yeah, that's good. All right, so I'm going to give you my shameless plug, and we are planning a hackathon. It'll be an Adobe
Nice.
hackathon. It's going to be in January, and it's going to be in Orlando, Florida. So right
What?
now we're getting
Disney World?
buy-in. Disney World. You got it, Disney World. So
Yes.
we our events person Madeline has floated this idea, and I started thinking to myself, why hasn't anybody done anything in Orlando? So um, we are, yes, planning on something, some kind of a hackathon. We would like to include the merchant docs and ADLS, Magento Adobe Learning Services as well. So I think it would be super exciting if we could get more of the Adobe community in on this. This will be a completely community-based event, just like your typical hackathons. But it'll be in Orlando. So we're thinking maybe a Friday, maybe a Thursday. I don't know. We haven't quite figured out the days yet, but certainly there'll be time in the evening, weekends to do the whole theme park as well. That's
Nice.
my
Yeah,
shameless
after a couple years of Vegas. Yeah, after a couple years of Vegas, I would love to do some Disney World instead.
Absolutely. Good. All right. Well, thanks, Mark. This has been fun. I've really enjoyed talking to you, and I actually learned a ton about Shopify today. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And feel free to reach out if you want to talk Shopify anymore. And anyone that's listening, feel free to reach out. My email is mark@netalico.com. Feel free to email me directly, and I will give you my honest opinion.
Great. Yeah, and that's one last thing I meant to say, that I appreciate that you do give your honest opinion on social media and wherever. But we will put your contact in the show notes. If you have anything, like if you want to send me any extra links, I'll put those in the show notes. And great. Thank you. Have a great day.
You too.
Magento Creative, partnering with the client to help fulfill their strategic growth, serving the world as an Adobe Gold partner and BigCommerce Elite partner. Magento, the code of commerce.